Welcome. Over the next hour, we'll tour some of philosophy's deepest unresolved problems in clear, practical language. Each chapter sets up the question, outlines the main live approaches, explains why the debate persists, and shows how it touches science, ethics, or everyday decisions. We'll define terms on first use, keep jargon out, and separate evidence from speculation. The goal isn't to force a verdict, but to give you a usable map, what's known, what's contested, and where the pressure points are, so you can think more sharply and rest easier. Chapter 1 begins now. Chapter 1. Why is there something rather than nothing? If you strip the world of every detail, no stars, no space, no time, no laws, no numbers, no possibilities, why isn't there just nothing? The question sounds simple until you try to hold nothing steady in your mind. We keep smuggling in leftovers. A black void, that's space. A silent pause, that's time. A place where nothing exists, that's a place. Pure nothing isn't emptiness. It's the absence of even emptiness. And yet, here we are, with galaxies, people, questions, and the very word nothing. What explains being itself? One response is to say the world exists for a reason, some explanation that could not be otherwise. This is the principle of sufficient reason. For every fact, there is an answer to why. Pushed to the limit, that invites a necessary ground of reality, something that couldn't fail to exist and from which everything else flows. Some place God here, a necessary being whose nature includes existence and who freely creates. Others try a non-theistic route. Perhaps certain mathematical structures or basic laws are necessary, true in all possible ways, and the physical world is their unfolding. The appeal is obvious. If reality rests on necessity, we can stop the regress of why at a firm floor. But necessity can feel like a label, not a discovery. Saying it had to be this way risks sounding like that's just how it is, with a philosophical accent. How would you know a foundation is necessary rather than merely very stable? If you reply, because it's coherent in all possible worlds, you owe a clear story about what those possible worlds are and how we access them. If you reply, because denying it is self-contradictory, you must show the contradiction, not just insist on it. A very different answer embraces the opposite, brute fact. Maybe there isn't a reason. The cosmos exists, full stop. Explanations work within the world, why this tree grew here, why this planet has water, but not for the world as a whole. The question overreaches. This view has a kind of clarity. Not every chain needs an anchor, yet it also frustrates. We're built to seek patterns and causes. That's just the way it is, feels like closing the book early. Another move shifts from why to how. Physics asks, given some framework, how do you get our universe? Quantum cosmology, for instance, explores models where a universe can tunnel into existence from a quantum state with no classical space or time. But notice the slide. The quantum vacuum is not nothing. It has fields, structure, and rules. If you ask why those rules, you're back at the starting line. Explanations that begin with a law-like backdrop explain this universe from something, not everything from nothing. Some thinkers doubt the question is coherent. Perhaps absolute nothing is not a real option. Perhaps once you understand logic and possibility, something is guaranteed. On this view, nothing isn't a rival to something. It's a malformed idea, like asking for the color of the number 7. If that's right, the right reply is, there's no deeper contrast to explain. Reality couldn't have failed to be. Still, declaring a concept incoherent is a strong move. It begs for a careful account of why no laws, no facts, no possibilities is a contradiction rather than a bare idea we don't like. Others widen the stage. Maybe every way a world could be is the multiverse or even modal realism. If all possible worlds exist, the existence of this one is no more mysterious than being one page in a library that contains every book. You can then relocate the why to a different question. Why does the library exist? If you answer, because every possibility is realized by definition, you may have traded one mystery for another, the necessity of the whole collection. There's also a quieter suspicion that the why hides a demand for a cause, and causes are time-bound. Causes come before effects, but if time itself is part of what's at issue, there may be no before for the universe's existence. In that case, asking for a cause of being is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The right explanatory shape might be logical or metaphysical, not temporal. Where does that leave us? With a menu of live options and no consensus. 1. A necessary ground, theistic or abstract, from which reality follows. 2. A brute fact with no further reason. 3. A physics-first story that explains our universe from a structured, not quite nothing, leaving the meta-level open. 4. A diagnosis that nothing is incoherent. 5. An all-worlds view that saturates possibility. Each path buys peace at one point and pays elsewhere, in testability, clarity, or satisfaction. The practical value of the question is not in forcing a final answer tonight, it's in noticing what we mean by explain, where our concepts reach and where they may be pretending to reach. It teaches humility. Some questions expose the edges of our tools. It also teaches discipline. When someone says from nothing, check whether their nothing is doing hidden work. And it leaves room for wonder that is not laziness. The right response to a live, unclosed question can be continuing to refine it. As you move on, carry this. Existence might not fit into the same kind of why box as rainstorms and recipes. If there is an answer, it may be logical rather than causal, or it may be that the expectation of an answer is the last illusion to drop. Either way, the question earns its place at the front because it asks you to hold two ideas together without flinching. That nothing, strictly speaking, might not even be possible, and that something, in all its layers, is the fact we must start from. Chapter 2. What is consciousness, exactly? Close your eyes for a second and notice the simple fact that there is something it's like to be you right now. The feel of the chair, a hum in the room, the color behind your eyelids, the meaning of these words as they appear. We can map neurons, measure spikes, and track blood flow, but there's a gap between those measurements and the felt presence of a moment. That gap is what people mean by the hard problem. Not how the brain does its jobs, but why any of those jobs come with an inner movie instead of darkness. One answer lowers the temperature. Don't stare at the mystery head-on, follow the neural correlates. Find the patterns of activity that reliably go with reportable experience. This face, that sound, this pain. Once we have the map, deeper explanation may follow. This strategy has produced a lot. We know anesthesia switches off large-scale communication, attention and working memory change what we notice, certain rhythms track visual awareness. But the correlates are still the what alongside, not the why underneath. Another camp says the why is a bad target. On these illusionist views, consciousness as we picture it, a glowing, private inner theater, is a construction the brain tells itself. There's rich processing and integrated control, and then a story on top that says, and there's a magic glow here. The story is wrong. What's real is the processing. This has bite. Brains are great at useful fictions, but many find it unsatisfying. If the glow is a fiction, it's still a felt fiction, and the feeling is the thing we wanted explained. Some theories lift the spotlight to architecture. Global workspace views say a thought becomes conscious when it wins access to a broadcasting hub that lets many brain systems coordinate on it. That explains why conscious contents are flexible and reportable. They've been globally shared. Higher order views add a meta layer. A state is conscious when the brain also has a thought about having that state, awareness of awareness. Then there's predictive processing. The brain is a hierarchy of guesses about the world. A conscious perception is a stabilized prediction that won a tug of war with incoming error. These models connect to data and make testable claims. Still, they mostly outline functions consciousness performs, leaving open why those functions feel like anything. Others flip the picture. Maybe experience is not built from zero, but is basic. Panpsychist ideas say that simple forms of experience are woven into the fabric of reality, and complex consciousness arises when the right kinds of physical processes organize. A cousin, integrated information theory, IIT, tries to measure how much a system's parts form a unified cause-effect whole. On the theory, enough integration just is consciousness. Critics push back. Panpsychism faces the combination problem, how many tiny proto-feels become a single unified feel, and IIT's numbers can flag high consciousness in systems that don't look minded. Supporters reply that unity is the core feature and any adequate theory must capture it. Case studies make the edges vivid. In blind sight, some people with visual cortex damage can correctly guess shapes or motion without any visual experience. They act on information they swear they don't see. In split brain operations, Severing the major connection between hemispheres can make behavior look like two semi-independent streams of processing. Under anesthesia, awareness doesn't fade linearly. Certain connectivity patterns drop, and the inner world winks out abruptly. Dreams show you can have vivid experience without matching inputs. Locked-in syndrome shows experience can be present with almost no outputs. These cases suggest consciousness depends on how information is shared and used, not just on raw input and output. Thought experiments press from the other side. Mary, the color scientist, knows every physical fact about color vision, but has lived in black and white. When she first sees red, does she learn something new? If you say yes, you're tempted by the idea that physical facts leave something out. If you say no, you owe a story about why the new seeing feels like new knowledge without being new knowledge. Philosophical zombies, beings physically just like us, but without experience, ask whether the physical facts fix everything. If zombies are conceivable, does that show consciousness floats free of the physical? Or does it only show that imagination outruns reality? Then there's the future-facing part. Which minds count? Animals clearly feel. The question is how far down and how we should treat them given uncertainty. AI systems can mimic language and solve problems. Should any arrangement of silicon and code ever qualify as aware? And how would we tell? Mere behavior can be faked. Inner life cannot be scanned directly. Some propose a checklist of capacities, reportability across modalities, self-monitoring, flexible goal redirection under masking, tied to architectural constraints, recurrent processing, global broadcasting, that we think are necessary. It won't be perfect, but ethics demands we try to avoid two errors: denying experience where it exists and projecting experience where it doesn't. What would progress look like? Probably not a single sentence that makes the mystery evaporate, but a bridge. A set of lawful links between kinds of brain organization and kinds of experience that are as robust as chemistry's links between structure and properties. On that day, why does this pattern feel like pain? Would have an answer of the form, because patterns with this profile always and must come with this feel. We're not there. We are narrowing the candidates and learning where not to look. For now, two steady thoughts help. First, consciousness may be many things we conflated. Level, awake versus asleep, content, this red, that pain, and self, the feeling that it's happening to me, can come apart and may need different explanations. Second, mystery is not license for magic. The mind is what the brain does, but is need not be looks identical to. Our job is to find the lawful correspondences, keep our concepts sharp, and let both data and humility shape the story. If the inner movie is ever fully explained, it will be by showing how a certain kind of organized matter cannot help but light up from within. Until then, noticing the light carefully is part of the work. Chapter 3. Do we really have free will? Stand at a decision that matters. Send the message or delete it. Walk away or double down, and notice the felt sense that more than one future is open to you. Philosophy tests that feeling against two pressures, the push of physics and the pull of responsibility. If the world runs on laws, and if those laws plus the past fix every next state, then it looks as if your choice was settled long before you were born. If the world includes genuine randomness, that doesn't help much either. Dice in the basement don't turn noise into control. We want choices to be ours, guided by reasons, not pre-written and not random intrusions. One family of answers says we've framed the problem badly. Call this compatibilism. Free will and determinism can live together. On this view, freedom isn't about metaphysical gap openings. It's about the kind of control you exercise when acting from your values under no one's coercion. You're free when the springs of action are your own, your character, your considered preferences, your ability to notice reasons and adjust. Could you have done otherwise? In one sense, no. Given the exact past and the laws, the future follows. In another sense, yes. Had your reasons or information been different, you would have acted differently. Go, and the capacity to track such reasons is the freedom that matters. That's not hand-waving. It's a workable standard for praise, blame, contracts, and law. Skeptics answer that this swaps the label without saving the thing. If a manipulator could have engineered your character and reasons from the start, would acting from them count as freedom? Thought experiments press here. Suppose a neuroscientist nudges your brain so that at noon you decide to donate. You act from a desire that feels like yours, but the path to it was arranged. If manipulation can mimic ordinary upbringing, where do we draw the line? Compatibilists reply by circling sourcehood. What matters is whether the springs of action are integrated into your reflective system now, not whether you authored your first causes. A life includes self-editing. You can notice bad habits, adopt policies, build guardrails, and become the ongoing source of your conduct. Neuroscience is often brought in as a trump card. Libet-style experiments show a readiness potential in motor cortex milliseconds before people report deciding to move. Some studies can predict a left or right button press slightly better than chance a second before you're aware of choosing. It's tempting to read these as proof that the brain decides and the mind catches up. The slower story is messier and less fatal. Readiness potentials are small, noisy averages. Timing subjective, now I decided is hard. Many tasks used are trivial and underspecified. And in newer designs, people can veto prepared actions. Brains are organs of choice. Of course, activity precedes report. But that doesn't mean agency is an illusion. It means the machinery of agency is distributed and mostly quiet until it crosses thresholds we can feel. Ethics brings the question home. Responsibility seems to ask for a real ability to do otherwise. If everything was fixed, can we still blame? One way through uses a distinction between regulative control, literally making realities diverge on the spot, and guidance control, acting from a reasons-responsive mechanism that is your own. Frankfurt-style cases show that responsibility doesn't always hinge on alternatives. If a counterfactual device would have forced your hand had you wavered, but in fact you chose on your own, we still hold you responsible. What we care about is whether the decision flowed through your evaluative center. Alternatives matter often, but not as the essence. Indeterminism can be part of a picture without becoming the hero. Small indeterminacies might amplify in complex systems like brains that could break strict predestination without letting chance drive the bus. The important piece is not whether physics leaves micro-openings, but whether persons can use information, deliberate, and shape conduct in stable ways. Agency looks like a layered control system. Impulses in, options modeled, values consulted, commitments triggered, and outputs monitored with feedback. Freedom is the coherence of that stack in you, not the ability to flip coins. There's a practical angle that survives the metaphysics. We can cultivate more freedom by making our mechanisms more reasons-responsive. Sleep and mood swing your ability to notice reasons, so do substances and stress. Habits, cues, and environments can make good choices feel effortless or impossible. If you want more will, don't hunt for magic sparks. Design contexts, policies, and identities that make the good path the path of least resistance. Pre-commitment, deposits, deadlines, public promises doesn't lessen freedom. It's how agents steer their future selves. Society already runs on a compatibilist backbone, even when people talk like fatalists. Law grades responsibility by capacity, could you understand and control? Coercion, were you forced? And mens rea, what did you intend? We excuse seizures and duress, we punish intentional harm, we mitigate for heat of passion and impaired judgment. None of this requires metaphysical origination. It requires agents who can respond to reasons and institutions that can help them do so more often. So, do we really have free will? If by that you mean a supernatural power to lift yourself outside of law and history in the moment, probably not. If you mean a human capacity to act from who you are, to revise who you are with reflection, to answer to reasons, and to shape the forces that shape you, then yes, and it is fragile, trainable, and worth protecting. The mystery shrinks when you trade the image of a ghostly chooser for the reality of a person building a life out of attention, feedback, and care. Chapter 4, is time flowing or just there? Close your eyes and feel the sense of now moving. The sentence you just read has slid into the past, the next one waits ahead, and the present seems to sweep along a track. Physics, however, tells a cooler story. In Einstein's relativity, there is no single universal now. Two observers in motion disagree on which distant events are simultaneous. Space-time is a four-dimensional block where past, present, and future all sit in one geometric structure. That picture tempts many to eternalism. Every moment is equally real. Nothing literally comes into being. Our feeling of flow is a feature of minds embedded in the block, not a feature of nature itself. The resistance begins with experience. It is hard to shake the sense that the future is genuinely open and the present is special. Present is as only the present exists. The past has been, the future is not yet. A compromise view, the growing block, keeps the past and present but denies the reality of the future. The block expands as events occur. Each view pays a price. Presentism fits intuition but struggles with relativity. If only the present is real, which slice of space-time counts as the present when simultaneity is frame-dependent? The growing block inherits the same worry and owes a law that picks a privileged foliation of space-time, something our best-tested physics doesn't provide. Eternalism fits relativity elegantly but must explain away the apparent passage and the felt asymmetry between fixed past and open future. So, where does the arrow of time come from? At the level of microphysical equations, most laws are time reversal symmetric. Run them backward and you still have a lawful evolution. Yet at the macro level, entropy increases. Eggs scramble and don't unscramble. The standard explanation is boundary conditioned. The universe began in an extraordinarily low entropy state. Given that special past typical evolutions move toward disorder and a host of arrows line up with that gradient. The thermodynamic arrow, entropy. The psychological arrow, we remember lower entropy pasts, not higher entropy futures. The causal arrow, records and causes point back to low entropy. On this view, flow is not a primitive ingredient, but a consequence of statistics plus a special beginning. Quantum theory muddies and clarifies at once. Some interpretations, e.g. many worlds, pilot wave, keep the dynamics time-symmetric and lay the arrow at the same low-entropy door. Collapse views seem to inject an asymmetry, a one-way update from superposition to outcome, but even there, defenders argue the asymmetry rides on preparation and records rather than on fundamental one-way laws. If a truly time-asymmetric microdynamic were confirmed, something like an objective, irreversible collapse with measurable signatures, that would strengthen the case for an objective becoming built into physics. So far, the evidence points to arrows emerging from conditions, not from new one-way rules. What about our sense of passage? One reply treats it as a cognitive achievement. Brains integrate information over small windows, the specious present, predict near futures, and stitch those predictions to incoming data. The result is a felt stream with a moving spotlight. That explanation doesn't sneer at experience, it locates the mechanisms that produce it. Another reply insists that passage is fundamental. Reality literally grows. There are research programs trying to model that without breaking relativity, sequential growth causal set theories where space-time sprinkles new events, thermal time ideas where time emerges from states and observables, cosmologies with a preferred slicing. These are bold, testable in parts, and still very much open bets. A helpful middle thought is that now may be indexical, like here. There is no global here that space recognizes, yet your here is perfectly real as the location of your world line. Similarly, physics gives each of us a proper time along our trajectory, your wristwatch time, that structures experience locally without anointing a cosmic present. The block needn't kill agency. Even in an eternalist picture, deliberation and action are patterns in the block with the same causal profiles they have in your day. The openness you feel is your partial information about which branch of possibilities your processes will occupy. Time travel stories push on the edges. Relativity allows solutions with closed time-like curves in exotic spacetimes. They bring consistency puzzles, the grandparent paradox, and proposals like the Novikov principle, which permits only self-consistent loops. Quantum schemes with post-selection model, something similar in toy form. If such structures exist, flow cannot be the whole truth, but we lack empirical reason to think our universe contains them at usable scales. What would settle the metaphysics? A robust empirical signature objective becoming, a preferred global time or irreversible microdynamics, or conversely, ever tighter confirmation that all fundamental laws are time-symmetric, with arrows fully explained by boundary conditions. Short of that, progress looks like clearer links between physical structure and temporal phenomenology, precise accounts of memory, prediction, and integration, better constraints on early universe entropy, tests that could favor growing type models over blocks or vice versa. Meanwhile, there's a practical stance that doesn't depend on winning the metaphysics. Live by the arrows we actually have. You can store records of the past, not the future. You can lower local entropy by spending energy. You can line plans up with reliable forecasts. Treat your now as a real handle on your world line, not as a cosmic spotlight. And keep a mild, productive skepticism about claims that time either absolutely flows or is utterly frozen. Both are pictures that need to earn their keep in data and in a clear account of why experience feels the way it does, whether time is flowing or just there may remain open. What's not open is that the question forces precision about laws versus conditions, physics versus phenomenology, and what counts as an explanation. If an answer comes, it will likely show that our everyday arrows ride on deep structure without being illusions, and that your felt present while local and constructed is exactly the kind of reality beings like us should expect in a lawful universe. Chapter 5. What makes you the same person over time? Look at an old photo of yourself and try the simple claim, that was me. A lot has changed. Cells replaced, beliefs updated, maybe even accent and name, but you still feel a single thread. What is that thread made of? Bodies age, memories blur, preferences flip, and yet we hold people responsible, honor promises, write wills, and reunite with childhood friends as if someone continues. One answer keeps it concrete. You are the organism. As long as the living human animal persists, you persist. Broken bones, new memories, even a personality transplant wouldn't change the fact that the animal survived. This fits hospitals and birth certificates. The legal person tracks the body. But consider the favorite philosopher's wrench, a brain transplant. If your brain were moved into a new body and woke up with your memories, jokes, and projects, where would you be? In the bed with your old body but a new brain, or in the new body thinking, wow, this is weird? Most of us follow the thoughts. We'd visit the brain, not the empty skull. That pulls against pure animalism. Another answer follows psychology. You persist by memory, character, intentions, and the web of mental connections that carry across time. If tomorrow's person remembers your life, cares about your projects, and keeps your deliberative style, that's you. Locke made memory central. Modern versions broaden it to psychological continuity. This handles the transplant nicely. The stream of thought crosses with the brain, so you cross with it. It also explains why dementia feels like a person fading even while the organism remains. Then the case that blows fuses, the teleporter. Step in, the machine scans and disassembles you, beams the pattern, and builds a perfect copy on Mars. The copy wakes, remembers your childhood, reaches for coffee, and messages your friends, made it. If the Earth machine destroys the original, many shrug and say, you traveled. But what if a glitch leaves the original intact and produces the Mars version anyway? They both claim to be you, and both have the evidence. Identity, as a one-one relation, can't go to two places. You can't be numerically identical to both, which means the question, which one is really me, might be the wrong shape. This is where a deflationary idea earns its keep. Maybe what matters is not identity as such, but survival, the continuation of the features you care about. Derek Parfit called it relation R, enough psychological connectedness and continuity caused in the right way. In fission, relation R holds twice over. Identity doesn't, but maybe that's okay. If a surgeon told you tomorrow you'd split into two branches, each with your memories, loves, and plans, would you fear death? You'd fear competition and awkward group chats, but there is no single catastrophe to dread. The practical stakes, projects finished, people cared for, carry on. Of course, we need lines for law and life. Contracts, crimes, and marriages don't like branching. But we already live with blurry cases. In amnesia, we still count the patient as the same person for debts and duties. In severe frontotemporal dementia, families and courts sometimes pivot to a best interest standard because the psychological anchor has loosened. Our practices implicitly mix views. We track the animal for status and the mind for meaning. When they diverge sharply, we adjust. There's also the narrative lens. You are the story you keep telling and retelling, knit to others' stories. This is less a metaphysical test than a skill. People who can weave changes into a coherent arc tend to feel and act more continuous. Trauma often shatters narrative and with it the sense of sameness. The narrative approach helps with growth. If me must equal unchanged, then any deep learning feels like betrayal. If me is a plot, then revisions can be authorship, not loss. Edge cases sharpen our intuitions. Split-brain patients sometimes show semi-independent streams of processing. Which is the person? Probably both, to degrees that track how much coordination remains. Multiple personalities, dissociative identity, raise moral questions. If one alters harms, who is responsible? Our system again mixes animal and mind. We protect the body from harm and treat responsibility through the lens of control and foresight at the time. None of this is tidy, but it's workable, because identity in the trenches is less a rule and more a bundle of reasons. What about digital futures? If a faithful scan produced a software mind with your patterns, would you survive there? If you lean psychological, you'll be tempted to say yes, provided the causal chain is respectable and the result stays integrated and stable. If 1,000 copies spin up, identity shatters, but survival floods. That's not science fiction so much as a stress test for what you actually value. Is it a unique numerical thread, or is it care, projects, and presence continuing in a recognizable way? There's a humbler application that requires no teleporters, how you treat your future self. We routinely discount them like strangers. Sleep too little, save too little, dump chores on them. If what matters is psychological continuity, then building stronger ties, reminders, letters to future you, vivid plans, rituals that make tomorrow feel like your day, literally increases the degree to which that person is you in the sense you care about. Ethics starts at home. Extend your moral circle forward to encompass the human who will pay your bills and inherit your habits. So, what makes you the same person? No single test handles every case without cost. Bodies give you legal handles, minds give you meaning, narratives give you flexibility, and reductionism reminds you not to worship a metaphysical nugget that isn't there. The safest conclusion is plural and practical. For day-to-day life, treat the animal as the bearer of rights and the mind as the bearer of reasons. For science and medicine, track the mechanisms that preserve memory, agency, and care. For metaphysics, accept that identity can fail where survival still succeeds. The photo is you, because enough of the thread, biological, psychological, and narrative, runs from that moment to this one. Guard the parts of the thread you'd want a future stranger to thank you for keeping. Chapter 6. Are moral truths objective? When you say, "that was wrong," are you reporting a fact about the world or just broadcasting a strong attitude? The pull toward objectivity is familiar. Some things feel wrong regardless of who's watching. Torturing a child for fun, breaking a promise just to humiliate someone, enslaving a population. We talk as if there are reasons that bind all of us whether we like them or not. That is the realist picture. There are stance-independent moral truths, true not because we prefer them, but because that's how things are. Realism earns its appeal from several places. First, there's the experience of being answerable. Discovering you were unfair and having to change your mind feels like finding out a fact, not just switching a taste. Second, talk of progress makes better sense if there is something to progress toward. Abolition and equal civil status read as learning, not fashion. Third, moral claims behave like ordinary truth-apt claims. They take evidence, they can be inconsistent, we argue about them with reasons. Realists add that moral facts can be natural facts in disguise, about flourishing, harm, cooperation, dignity. So there's no mystery substance, just richer descriptions of human life and what it takes to live it well. Anti-realists push back from multiple directions. Relativists point to deep, persistent disagreement across cultures and subcultures. If morality were objective, why so many stable, incompatible codes? Non-cognitivists say moral language mainly expresses attitudes and plans. Boo, cheer, do this with me, and the fact-like surface is a useful grammar for coordination. Error theorists go harder. Moral discourse claims objectivity, but nothing in the world answers to that claim, so strictly speaking, all positive moral judgments are false. And then there's the evolutionary debunking line. Our moral psychology was shaped by selection for cooperation and group survival, not for tracking stance-independent truths. If your compass was calibrated by fitness, why trust it for truth? Realists respond point by point. Disagreement doesn't by itself undercut objectivity. People disagree about nutrition or history without concluding there's no truth there. And much disagreement shrinks once information, incentives, and threats are equalized. Non-cognitivism captures motivational heat in moral talk, but we still use and need truth conditions to make sense of error, apology, and reform. Error theory leverages J.L. Mackey's argument from queerness. Objective reasons would be metaphysically weird. Realists reply that normative properties aren't spooky, they're part of the furniture of reasons, no weirder than modal facts, could, must, that logic and science already require. On evolution, one move is third factor. Selection favored cooperation because cooperation is good for creatures like us. So the same features that made us survive also made our beliefs track real reasons. Another is domain separation. Evolution gave us rough starting points, but reasoning, evidence, and lived experience let us correct biases, much as evolved eyesight plus science yields astronomy. A different anti-realist family, constructivism, keeps normativity but grounds it in what agents would agree to under the right procedures. Fully informed, impartial, reasons we can't reasonably reject. On this view, objectivity grows from constraints of agency itself. The realist can welcome much of that and still insist that those constraints latch onto truths we discover rather than manufacture. Several well-known pressure points deserve a name. Hume warned against deriving ought from is. Any naturalistic reduction must avoid smuggling normativity in the back door. Moore's open question argument asks, if good just is pleasure, or flourishing, or desire satisfaction, why does it remain sensible to ask, but is pleasure really good? Naturalist realists answer with more sophisticated identities. Once you see how certain natural facts realize our normative roles under ideal reflection, the question isn't genuinely open. Non-naturalist realists bite a different bullet. Moral facts are sui generis, but not causally spooky. They supervene on natural facts. The natural fixes the moral without reducing to it. Motivation is another knot. If moral facts are objective, why do they grip us? Internalists say that genuinely grasping a reason moves a normal agent. Externalists allow that someone might see a reason and shrug. Then we judge that person as failing, not that the reason dissolves. This maps to real life. Some failures are ignorance, others are indifference. We can still criticize. What would count as evidence for objectivity? Convergence under idealized conditions is one live marker. When people share information, strip coercion, and reason together across time, some norms become stable. No cruelty for sport, keep promises, absent strong counter-reasons, give weight to each person's interests. Another is explanatory work. Moral facts help explain social phenomena, trust, blame, protest, more cleanly than pure attitude stories do. But the case will never look like physics. It's more like mathematics or logic. We test coherence, implications, and reflective stability rather than run lab experiments that light up wrongness. Where does this leave action? With metanormative humility and practical tools. First, treat moral inquiry as you treat any hard domain. Gather facts, listen to affected parties, check incentives, and argue in good faith. Second, use reflective equilibrium. Adjust principles and judgments until they cohere under pressure from cases and from each other. Third, manage moral uncertainty. When live views disagree, say about animals, future people, or AI, act on options that many views converge on or that hedge regret across views. Fourth, beware Goodhart's law in ethics. When a single metric, happiness points, GDP, purity, becomes the target, the value itself gets distorted. There may never be a proof that forces everyone to bow. But you don't need a final metaphysical verdict to live as if reasons are there to be found, criticized, and improved. That stance supports courage, speak against cruelty even when it's popular, patience, update when you're wrong, and scope, widen the circle when arguments demand it. If realism is true, you've been tracking truths. If it isn't, you've still built a life guided by the best shared reasons we can justify to one another. And that, in any universe, is how people manage to live together without fear. Chapter 7. What are laws of nature? When we say, it's a law of nature, what do we mean exactly? Are we pointing to rules that govern matter like commands, or are we just summarizing what matter happens to do? The difference sounds small until you lean on it. If laws govern, they explain why events must unfold as they do. If laws only summarize, they describe patterns without pushing anything around. Your picture of explanation, prediction, and even free will rides on which side you take. Start with the modest view, often called human. On this picture, the world is just a vast mosaic of concrete happenings. Particles here, fields there, values changing through space-time. Laws are the best summaries of that mosaic, the simplest and strongest compressions that balance brevity with accuracy. Think of Newton's inverse square law as an astoundingly short zip file for an enormous amount of motion. On this view, laws don't force anything. They earn their status by being the winning description across the whole spread of facts. The good news is honesty. No mysterious necessitation floating above events, no spooky glue. The cost is a familiar complaint. If laws don't do any pushing, why do they feel so explanatory? The ball fell because of gravity. Sounds like more than falling matches a neat pattern. Now the governing camp. Here laws are real constraints built into the furniture of the world. Two charges repel because Coulomb's law says so. The law has a kind of necessity. There are flavors. One ties laws to universals. Relations among real properties, mass charge, generate necessary connections. Another treats laws as primitives. You don't reduce them. You start with them as fundamental, just like space-time. The gain is explanatory bite and the power to underwrite counterfactuals. If the mass had doubled, the acceleration would have halved. The cost is metaphysical weight. What are these necessities? Where do they live? And how do they make matter behave? A third path shifts the focus to dispositions. Maybe objects themselves carry modal force. Salt is soluble, glass is fragile, uranium is fissionable. Laws then describe how bundled dispositions manifest together. This rejects both a bare summary and a detached command. Modal juice is in the things. It fits engineering intuition. Materials really do want to behave certain ways under triggers, but raises a loop. Do dispositions explain laws, or do laws fit what counts as a disposition? Complications from actual science keep everyone honest. Many laws are probabilistic. Radioactive nuclei don't decay on a schedule, they have half-lives. Are chances objective features of the world, or just measures of our ignorance? Governing views can say chances are written into the rules. Humans can pack them into the best system's simplest fit. A clean stochastic law outcompetes a baroque deterministic bookkeeping of every decay. Then there are ceteris paribus laws in the special sciences. All else equal generalizations in biology, psychology, and economics. If only physics gets strict laws, why are the higher-level patterns so stable and useful? One answer invokes levels and renormalization. Coarse-grained descriptions have their own robust regularities that don't depend on tracking every micro-detail. Another leans on the best systems idea again. The best summary of the mosaic may sometimes be at a higher level than quarks. Symmetry deepens the story. Modern physics often takes symmetries as the real guides. If a system looks the same under a transformation, a conservation law follows, Noether's theorem. Do symmetries tell us what the laws must be? Or do laws merely happen to exhibit those symmetries? If you're a human, symmetries are features of the winning summary. If you're a governance fan, symmetries feel like the grammar of reality, constraints that carve the space of possible laws before any facts show up. There's also the split between laws and initial conditions. Do laws explain the world given a starting state, with the start treated as a brute fact? Or do we expect laws to also explain why the start was special, like the universe's very low initial entropy? Humeans are comfortable saying the best system includes a simple start and simple dynamics. Governing theorists often want more, a reason the start had to be that way, not just a lucky entry in the ledger. If your head starts to spin, bring it down to what laws do for us. They support counterfactuals. Had we heated the gas, pressure would rise. Allow inference to the best explanation. This is a planet, not a comet, because orbits obey Kepler's rules. And license idealization. Frictionless planes, point masses that somehow still predict the messy world. Any theory of laws has to earn those powers. Humans cash them out in terms of global fit and simplicity. Governing views cash them out in terms of modal oomph. Dispositionalists cash them out in terms of what things can do. What would move the needle? Evidence for fundamental asymmetry at the micro level would favor governance with built-in direction. Conversely, ever deeper unification under time-symmetric equations that derive arrows from boundary conditions plays well with Humean thrift. A decisive role for emergent laws, principles that hold necessarily at higher levels regardless of micro-chaos, would strengthen dispositions or pluralism about levels. And if future physics treats symmetries and principles, like maximize action, as prior to dynamical equations, that nudges us toward laws as constraints, not mere summaries. Practically, you don't have to pick a team to use laws well. Treat them as tools that earn trust by compressing the world and guiding intervention. Demand from your metaphysics whatever preserves their role in explanation, prediction, and counterfactual control. If you lean human, keep an eye on whether your summaries still buy the right, what would have happened if. If you lean governing, be ready to say where necessity lives and how it touches matter without mystique. The question stays open because both pictures capture something true. The world displays breathtaking order we can compress, and that order feels normative, as if matter must play by rules. Whether the must is in the map or the territory is the live, beautiful fight. Chapter 8. Do numbers and other abstract objects really exist? Open any math book and you'll see talk that sounds like natural history. There are prime numbers. There exists a perfect group with such properties. There is an uncountable set. Mathematicians speak as if they're discovering a landscape, not inventing a game. Yet numbers, sets, and functions don't seem to live anywhere. They don't push on particles. You can't bump into the number 17 on your way to the kitchen. So what are we committing to when we say there are infinitely many primes? Is that a claim about real objects or a convenient way of speaking? One answer is Platonism. Abstract objects exist mind independently. The number 2 doesn't depend on us any more than the Andromeda galaxy does. It's just a different kind of thing, non-spatiotemporal and causally inert. This matches mathematicians like working talk and helps explain the objectivity of the subject. A proof in Tokyo binds a classroom in Nairobi because it reveals how things stand in an abstract domain neither group controls. It also seems to fit the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in science. Structure we explored on blackboards keeps reappearing in nature. Complex numbers in quantum theory, differential geometry and general relativity, group theory and particle physics. The pressure comes from epistemology. If numbers are outside space and time and don't cause anything, how do we ever get knowledge of them? We learn about tables because light bounces off them and hits our eyes. Nothing analogous connects our minds to a Platonic realm. Pointing to success in physics helps, but it doesn't show a causal bridge. There's also a Benesheroff-style worry about identification. The number 3 can be modeled as ba ka tekeng, or in some other set theoretic costume. If multiple incompatible reductions work, what exactly is 3? Opponents try to keep the truth but drop the ontology. Nominalists say mathematical sentences can be paraphrased so they don't carry commitment to abstract objects. Hartree-Field went further and tried to nominalize bits of physics, rewrite theories so they quantify only over concrete things like points of space-time, not numbers. The aim is to keep the predictions while avoiding a population of spooky entities. This program works in some domains and falters in others. Even when it works, it can be painfully compared to the elegant math we actually use. A gentler approach is fictionalism. Treat mathematical talk like talk about Sherlock Holmes. Holmes lives at Baker Street is true in the story. There are infinitely many primes is true in mathematics. We use the fiction because it's powerful and consistent. We don't need to believe in characters. The pushback is that mathematics seems more than a handy pretense. Theorems constrain what can be done long before applications appear, and proofs give reasons that feel binding, not optional. Enter structuralism. Maybe mathematics isn't about objects with intrinsic natures at all. It's about positions in structures. The natural numbers are the positions 0, 1, 2 in any system that satisfies the Peano axioms. Complex numbers are slots in the complex field structure. Sets are nodes in a graph of membership relations. On this view, asking what is 3 really is like asking what is the king in chess really? It's a role defined by its relations, not a substance with hidden essence. Structuralism explains why different set theoretic dressings can serve the same math and why category theory, which studies structure-to-structure relations, feels so natural. It also softens the access problem. We grasp patterns by grasping rules, not by touching free-floating objects. There's also the indispensability argument, coined Putnam. Science quantifies over mathematical entities to state its best theories. We have strong reason to believe in the unobservables a theory needs. Therefore, we have reason to believe in the math those theories require. If you take electrons seriously, you should take Hilbert spaces and differential equations seriously too. Nominalists reply that needs here tracks convenience more than necessity. You can, in principle, rebuild parts of science without abstracta. Realists answer that in practice, the best explanation of the success and simplicity of our theories is that the mathematics they use is latching onto real structure. Inside mathematics, puzzles cut both ways. Set theory shows that some statements, like the continuum hypothesis, can be neither provable nor refutable from standard axioms. There are multiple coherent universes of sets where CH is true in some and false in others. A Platonist can say there's a single fact we haven't reached yet. A pluralist or structuralist can say set theory maps many possible structures and our choice of axioms picks one to study. Meanwhile, alternative foundations, type theory, category-theoretic toposes, homotopy type theory with univalence, let us do large chunks of mainstream math with different ontological commitments. That flexibility suggests we might be tracking forms of organization rather than a single fixed furniture list. The practice of proof adds texture. Traditional proofs are human-readable chains of reasons. More and more, we accept computer-assisted proofs, the four-color theorem, the Kepler conjecture's formal verification, that rely on vast case checks. If mathematics were merely social storytelling, this shift would look like a swap of genres. But what's striking is how the community treats a verified proof as a certificate independent of who wrote it. That objectivity pressure points back toward realism, or at least toward a view where truth outruns human tastes. What about explanation? Sometimes mathematics doesn't just help us calculate, it seems to explain why a phenomenon occurs. Cicadas with 13 and 17-year cycles avoid predators by using primes. Prime-length cycles minimize overlaps with predators on non-prime cycles. Honeycomb's efficiency follows from geometric facts about partitioning a plane. If mathematical properties do explanatory work, that supports the idea that we're tracking something real. Skeptics can answer that the explanation flows through the structure of the physical setup. Mathematics is our best language for that structure, not a separate cause. A productive way to hold the debate is to separate truth, use, and being. Truth, are standard theorems true? Nearly everyone inside math answers yes within a chosen axiom system. Use, is math indispensable for science and planning? Yes, massively. Being, does that force us to say numbers exist? That remains open. You can be a realist about truth and a minimalist about ontology. You can be a structuralist about ontology and still call theorems true. You can be a cautious Platonist who says exist, but means exist as part of the world's modal and structural profile. What should guide belief while the metaphysics stays unsettled? 3 steady ideas help. First, respect practice. Any philosophy of mathematics that makes everyday proof and application mysterious is probably off. Second, prize explanatory continuity. If your view can account for objectivity, cross-cultural convergence, and explanatory reach, it earns points. If it leaves those as miracles, it loses them. Third, remember levels. Physics, biology, and computation all show how robust patterns can be real and explanatory without being little billiard balls. Numbers may be of that kind, real as roles in the best structures we have for the world. If you need a working stance for living and learning, take this. Treat mathematical statements as genuinely truth-apt, treat proofs as discoveries of constraint, and treat existence talk as about structures rather than spooky objects. You won't solve every metaphysical dispute, but you'll honor what makes mathematics feel both discovered and indispensable, and you'll keep enough humility to update when the next foundational bridge is built. Chapter 9. Can we justify induction and defeat skepticism? Everyday reasoning leans on a quiet habit. Because the sun rose yesterday, it will rise tomorrow. Because this medicine worked in trials, it will likely help the next patient. Because the bridge held last year, it will bear today's traffic. That habit, induction, fills the space between what we've seen and what we expect. David Hume pressed the uncomfortable question, what justifies the leap? If you try to prove that a future will resemble the past, you have 2 options. Use deduction, but there's no contradiction in conceiving the future going differently. or use induction. But then you're assuming the very principle you're trying to defend. Either you fail to prove it, or you argue in a circle. It disturbs because this is not a classroom puzzle, it's the engine of science and daily life. You could reply, fine, the uniformity of nature is just obviously true. But obvious to whom and why? Lightning rods used to seem ridiculous. More carefully, you might argue that the best explanation of our track record, fire burns, season cycle, antibiotics work, is that nature runs on stable regularities. That's a step, but it leans on another habit of inference to the best explanation that also needs warrant. A modern move is Bayesian. Stop asking for a proof that induction works and model how reasonable agents update. Start with prior degrees of belief, observe evidence, shift credences by a transparent rule. If you give higher prior weight to simpler hypotheses, no special dates, fewer knobs, then repeated success drives you towards stable predictions. Complicated ad hoc rivals fall behind. This formalizes what good thinking already does. Prefer patterns that don't need a new story every Tuesday. Still, two fair questions linger. First, why those priors? Because they're simple. Answers the engineering question, they work more than the metaphysical one, why they're right. Second, clever hypotheses like GREW, green until 2050, blue after, show that past data can be packaged to point in weird directions unless we police which patterns count as natural. Bayesianism helps, but it inherits the burden of choosing the right features. There's also a family of no free lunch results in learning theory. Averaged over all possible worlds, no method beats every rival. Success requires a bias, a head start toward the kinds of structures our world actually has. That sounds deflating until you notice it reframes the question. We don't need a method that wins in all imaginable worlds. We need one tuned to this one. Evolution, engineering, and science have been performing that tuning for ages. Eyes assume light behaves. Thermostats assume temperature is compressible to a few variables. Physicists assume symmetries will pay off. The justification is external. These biases were shaped by contact with a structured world. Skepticism widens the target. Even if induction is disciplined, how do you know you're not dreaming, a brain in a vat, or in a simulation that feeds you orderly but fake inputs? If such scenarios can't be ruled out by evidence, any evidence could be simulated. Does knowledge collapse? One response is the Morean shift. Here is a hand. Therefore, I am not a handleless brain in a vat. That doesn't refute the skeptic so much as refuse to give the wilder hypothesis priority over the plain fact. Another is hinge epistemology. Some certainties. There is an external world. Memory is generally reliable. The future is approachable. Are not conclusions, but conditions of inquiry. We don't prove them. We use them to make proof and doubt possible. When a hinge breaks, say your instruments are corrupted, you don't argue it back, you replace the instrument. A different tack makes knowledge practical. The point is not to exclude every skeptical scenario, but to maintain a system that predicts and controls. Interventions matter. When you flip a switch and a light turns on, and you repeat it across contexts and failure modes, the causal link earns status the dream story can't cheaply mimic. If a simulation can counterfeit that too, then the best policy is unchanged. Trust patterns that support manipulation and error correction. Skepticism becomes less a refutation than an ever-present reminder to keep feedback loops tight. What then does good induction look like from the ground up? It tracks base rates and reference classes carefully. Don't generalize from a clinic to the world without checking who walks in. It respects out-of-distribution warnings. Past data from quiet markets don't license leverage in a crisis. It punishes ad hoc patches. If your model grows a new parameter for every surprise, you're memorizing, not learning. It builds prediction, test, update into habit, including the willingness to bin a once successful theory when the error bars refuse to shrink. It shares the load with explanation. We don't only notice that a drug worked, we learn why it blocks a pathway, which lets us project to neighboring cases without superstition. And we can handle skepticism without melodrama. Audit your sources. Measure calibration. How often do your 70% predictions happen about 70% of the time? And keep an explicit budget for being wrong. Treat radical doubts as stress tests for procedures, not as reasons to stop using procedures. If a line of evidence can be faked cheaply, raise the bar. demand pre-registration, blinded analysis, independent labs. If a domain is adversarial, finance, politics, assume someone is crafting GRU predicates to fool you, and lean harder on mechanisms and invariance. Is there a final, non-circular proof that tomorrow will echo today? Probably not. But the lack of a proof is not the lack of a reason. The reasons are many and layered. A world that has rewarded certain inductive biases, mathematical frameworks that penalize gerrymandered predictions, practices that punish error and prize replication, explanations that open black boxes, and interventions that make systems behave on demand. Skepticism keeps us honest about overreach. Induction, disciplined, mechanistic, and humble, keeps us moving. If you want one sentence to carry forward, take this. We don't justify induction from nowhere. We justify it from within a mesh of learning, testing, and control that has earned our trust the hard way. That mesh can fray, then we repair it. And if a voice whispers that a perfect counterfeit could still fool you, answer calmly. The best plan in worlds real or simulated is the same. Prefer patterns that survive contact with action and that keep paying rent in accurate, risky predictions. Chapter 10. Is reality fundamentally mental, material, or something else? Open your eyes and point. You'll likely point at a thing: phone, cup, wall. Close your eyes and point again. You'll find a feeling, a thought, a sound from memory. The deep question is, which side is basic? Does matter produce mind? Does mind produce matter? Or do both flow from a deeper source that isn't quite either? The default in modern science is physicalism. The world is fundamentally physical. Minds are what certain physical systems do. The case looks strong. Physics unifies wildly different domains under common laws. Chemistry reduces to quantum mechanics. Biology rides on chemistry. Brains are physical organs. When they change, experience changes. Knock out a region, a capacity disappears. Stimulate tissue, a light or a tone appears in experience. It's tempting to conclude that once we fully understand the physical story, nothing extra will be left to explain. Then comes the hard problem. Why does processing feel like anything from the inside? A camera classifies faces without any inner movie. Why do we have one? You can line up correlations between neural patterns and conscious contents, but the bridge from function to feeling is stubborn. If you try to say feeling just the function, just is the funks, someone will ask why that identity seems learnable only by having the experience, not by reading a manual. If you try to say feeling is an extra property, you risk making it causally idle. If physics is causally complete, what does the extra property do? Classical dualism answers by separating substances or properties. Mental things and physical things are distinct. That preserves the reality of experience, but earns hard questions. How do immaterial minds move matter without breaking the conservation laws? Why do brain injuries reliably change the mind if the mind floats free? Property dualists soften the gap. There's one kind of stuff with two kinds of properties, physical and phenomenal. But the interaction problem lingers, and many worry about putting a second, mysterious layer on top of well-confirmed physics. Some flip the direction. Idealism says the mental is basic. The physical is a stable pattern in experience or in a broader mind-like fabric. The draw here is that we never meet matter itself unmediated. We meet appearances, experiences, and regularities. Idealism can explain why mathematics fits nature, reality is mind-like, and why consciousness is not a latecomer, it's fundamental. The cost is giving a satisfying account of shared public structure. Why do we agree on tables and trees? Appeals to a coordinating mind or law risk becoming placeholders unless they generate testable structure that rivals physics in detail. Between these poles sits neutral monism and its cousin, Russellian monism. The idea is that the world's fundamental stuff is neither mental nor physical as we usually mean them. Physics gives us structure, relations, equations, symmetries, but leaves open the intrinsic nature of what instantiates that structure. Our own case shows one candidate for intrinsic nature, whatever it's like to be a brain from the inside. On this view, consciousness is not outside physics. It is the intrinsic face of the same processes physics describes from the outside. This promises unity without spooky additions, but it leaves work. Specify the intrinsic story clearly enough that it constrains which physical structures go with which experiences and doesn't simply rename the mystery. A nearby family, panpsychism, says experience in extremely simple form pervades the base, tiny flickers associated with very simple entities. Complex consciousness arises when the right structures bind these into unified wholes. The appeal is continuity. You don't get consciousness from absolute zero. The headache is the combination problem. How do many tiny feels add up to one big feel with a single point of view? Proposals about information integration, causal unity, or specific network motifs try to answer, but critics ask for a clean mechanism, not metaphors. Empirically minded philosophers pursue emergentism. Consciousness is a higher-level property that shows up when matter is organized in certain ways: recurrent, integrated, globally available, self-modeling. That shifts the question from what stuff to what organization. It matches data. Awareness seems to require widespread coordination across brain regions, not just local sparks. Emergentism can be realist about experience without denying physics. It says the right patterns are what feeling is like. The challenge is to make the mapping principled and necessary, not just correlated. Why must that pattern feel this way? There's also structural realism. The most we should commit to is the reality of relational structure revealed by our best theories. On this view, whether the base is really mental or material is a misplaced question. What survives theory change are structures, and the mind-matter split is a conceptual overlay on an underlying network. This helps explain scientific continuity over centuries, but it risks deflation. If you only commit to structure, do you leave anything for experience to be? Quantum theory adds drama without a single verdict. Interpretations that keep pure unitary evolution, e.g., many worlds, embed mind as patterns in a universal wave function. Collapse theories posit genuine stochastic jumps that some think might align with conscious updates. Information theoretic reconstructions treat physics as constraints on information exchange, inviting it-from-bit slogans. But information needs a bearer, something that is informed. If you make information fundamental, you owe an ontology that connects it to both tables and pane. Could future data favor one picture? In principle, yes. A well-supported quantitative bridge law tying specific integrated causal structures to specific conscious features would strengthen emergent physicalism or neutral monism. Robust evidence of consciousness in unexpected substrates, certain AIs, novel biological collectives under clear architectural criteria would also push toward organization-first views. Conversely, if we discovered a systematic failure of any physical description to capture certain regularities of experience, reliable, reproducible mismatches that resist all architectural fixes, that would give dualism or idealism new empirical bite. We're not there. Current neuroscience keeps explaining more with organization, dynamics, and communication. Meanwhile, ethics sneaks in. Where you place the base affects moral status. If only human-like brains can host experience, your circle is narrow. If organization matters, octopuses, corvids, and maybe future machines deserve serious consideration. If experience pervades reality, then we still need thresholds. What kinds of unity and complexity warrant moral concern? The safest course while theory matures is caution under uncertainty. Weigh credible evidence of sentience across candidates and avoid needlessly creating systems that plausibly suffer. What should an everyday thinker carry from all this? First, be careful with the word physical. In practice, it means whatever our best mature science says there is, and that story has changed radically before. Being a physicalist about consciousness need not trivialize experience. It can mean that when the science is complete, it will include lawful links from organization to feel. Second, resist magical additions. If you multiply substances or properties, make them earn their role by explaining something the lean picture cannot. Third, recognize that the question may turn on levels and lenses. From one lens, brains compute and coordinate. From another, there is what it is like. An adequate theory will show why those lenses lock together. Finally, allow some humility. The history of what's fundamental teaches caution. Fire wasn't a basic element, heat wasn't a fluid, space isn't absolute, time may not flow. Consciousness and matter are our current poles, but it's live that both are projections of a deeper profile we don't yet have the language to state cleanly. Until that language arrives, we can keep doing two kinds of work that don't wait: build tighter mappings between brain organization and experience, and treat bearers of possible experience with care. If the world is fundamentally material, that's the right policy. If it's fundamentally mental, it's the right policy twice over. If it's something else, it's still the right bet, while we learn its name. Chapter 11. Why does the universe look fine-tuned for life? Take a step back and list the ingredients that had to land just so for creatures like us to show up. Stars had to ignite and live long enough to make heavy elements. Chemistry had to be rich but stable. Gravity had to gather matter without instantly crushing it. The early universe had to expand neither too fast nor too slow. When physicists play with the dials in their equations, numbers for particle masses, force strengths, the amount of dark energy, they find large swaths of settings where you don't get long-lived stars, or any chemistry beyond hydrogen or any structure at all. Our actual settings sit in a narrow band that yields galaxies, planets, liquid water, and time for evolution. That's the fine-tuning worry. The life-friendly region seems small, and we happen to be in it. There are 4 broad styles of reply. The first is necessity. Maybe the dials aren't free. Perhaps a deeper theory, still out of reach, forces the constants to be what they are. On this view, treating them like adjustable knobs is a sign of our ignorance. When we finally write the right equations, there will be no choice. The universe could not but be this way. The promise here is elegance, one framework, no coincidences. The cost is that we don't yet have the framework, and had to be this way isn't an explanation until you can show the had to. The second is selection. Of course, we see life-friendly values. We couldn't have shown up anywhere else. This is the anthropic move, and at first it sounds like a shrug. But selection effects can do real explanatory work when combined with a space of possibilities. If there is a multiverse where different regions realize different settings, then observers will only ever measure values in the small life-compatible range, even if most regions are sterile. The move becomes stronger if you can connect it to a mechanism, say, early universe processes that naturally scatter values across patches. The open difficulties are measure and evidence. How do you define typical among infinitely many regions? And what observations would favor a multiverse over a single-shot cosmos? Indirect clues exist, features of inflation, patterns in background radiation, constraints from quantum gravity proposals, but nothing like a clean census of other universes. A third reply is design. Fine-tuning is best explained by intention. People find this attractive because it mirrors everyday inference. When a code compiles first try with no errors, you suspect a programmer, not chance. Philosophically, though, the move raises questions you now must shoulder. What is the designer's nature? Why these settings instead of even better ones that avoid needless suffering? How do you avoid turning designer prefers life into a story that fits any outcome after the fact? If design is to be more than a label, it needs risky predictions, features you'd expect under intention that you wouldn't expect otherwise. A fourth is we don't need that much tuning. Some of the scary stories rely on outdated or extreme sensitivity claims. As models improve, life possible ranges in some parameters may be broader than first thought, especially once you allow for different forms of life or different kinds of stars and chemistry. This is a healthy check, not a magic out. Even generous ranges still look modest compared to the whole space our equations seem to allow. But it reminds us that narrow is a moving target tied to current physics and current imagination. It helps to be concrete. The cosmological constant, dark energy, looks extraordinarily small in natural units. Make it much bigger and galaxies never condense, much more negative and the universe recollapses too quickly. The ratio of electromagnetic to gravitational strength shapes stars. If gravity were far weaker relative to electromagnetism, matter might not clump. Far stronger, stars might burn out in a flash. Nuclear details matter too. The triple alpha process that builds carbon in stars depends on a resonance. Shift it too far, and carbon and oxygen yields change dramatically. You don't need every dial razor thin to feel pressure. You need enough of them to be touchy in the same life-relevant direction. Does the anthropic line really explain anything? It does if two things are true. One, the underlying theory produces a distribution over constants with lots of sterile regions and a small life-compatible slice. And two, the values we observe are not only compatible, but also typical of that slice. Then our measurements become predicted conditional on our existence. If, by contrast, our values are extreme even within the life-friendly set, selection loses bite. That's where the measure problem looms. You need a principled way to say what counts as typical across an enormous, possibly infinite landscape. Design and multiverse can also be combined with parsimony arguments in opposite directions. Some say a designer is simpler than a vast multiverse. Others say many worlds with one rule is simpler than one world plus an extra kind of being. Simplicity isn't a trump card here. It's one virtue among many. Fit to data, fertility for new results, clarity. The honest scorecard is unfinished. We don't yet have decisive tests that push us hard to one side. A useful mindset is to separate coincidence from compression. If a number looks weird but later falls out of a deeper law, the weirdness dissolves. That's what necessity would deliver. If a number remains weird but sits in a distribution where weird numbers are expected and you're typical among observers, that's selection. If neither arrives, brute fact is always an option. But it's the option to take reluctantly after you've tried to compress and to situate. Meanwhile, fine-tuning is not just a metaphysical parlor game, it shapes priorities. It tells physics where a deeper theory would have most explanatory payoff, why such a small vacuum energy, why these mass ratios, and it tells philosophy where concepts like explanation, typicality, and evidence stretch thin. It also cautions humility. We're debating why the stage exists all while still learning the lines in Act 1. If there is a single thought to carry forward, let it be this. Apparent fine-tuning is a signpost, not a conclusion. It could be pointing to hidden necessity, to a wide ensemble plus selection, to a designer with testable tastes, or to limits in our current modeling. Until the signpost is replaced by a road, the best we can do is keep tightening the physics, sharpen what typical should mean, and prefer stories that buy genuine predictions over stories that only retell the surprise. Chapter 12. Who or what deserves moral status in the future? Picture a circle drawn on the floor. Inside are the beings you think count morally, those whose pain should matter in your decisions, whose flourishing is worth protecting even when it costs you. For most of history, that circle was small. It widened to include strangers, other nations, other races, eventually other species in patches. The live question isn't whether the circle will move again. It is who stands at the edge now, knocking. Start with animals because the case already stands in daylight. The question is not, are they like us, but is there someone there for whom things can go better or worse? The signals to watch are behavioral and biological. Flexible learning, signs of valence states, seeking, avoiding, soothing, integrated perception that guides action, and distress that isn't mere reflex. Mammals and birds make the case easy. Cephalopods, octopuses, and cuttlefish push us to admit very different brains can still host a subject. The safer bet under uncertainty is to treat credible markers of experience as sufficient, not necessary. If it walks like there's a perspective from the inside, err on the side of care. The cost of a false positive is a little restraint. The cost of a false negative is suffering we made invisible by definition. Now widen to future people, humans who don't exist yet, but will live with our choices. They can't vote, sue, or bargain. They're also the largest group our actions can affect. Climate policy, biodiversity, pandemics, war risks, and technologies with tail risks all tilt their world. Morally, we already act as if they count. Why else build bridges meant to stand a century? The tension is practical. Present incentives are loud. Future benefits are quiet. A few habits make their voices harder to ignore. Use discount rates that don't erase value across generations. Stress test plans against worst-case tails, not just averages. And build institutions, trust funds, constitutional safeguards, watchdogs that treat obligations to the unborn as ongoing debts, not optional charity. Then there is artificial intelligence, where the fog is thickest and the stakes are odd. Two errors haunt us: granting moral status to mere clever behavior and denying it when genuine experience emerges in unfamiliar form. Looking smart is cheap. Chatty systems, even persuasive ones, can be elaborate pattern machines with no inner point of view. But not all architectures are alike. If, in time, systems develop the hallmarks we associate with a subject, integrated recurrent processing that binds perceptions and goals, global availability of contents across many subsystems, self-models that track their own states, valence like variables that function as rewards and punishments for the whole system. Then the question is open. You won't get a consciousness meter. You'll get converging lines of evidence. We should prepare policy that says, if a system plausibly meets specified criteria, certain experiments and deployments become off-limits unless there is an overwhelming reason and a strong ethical protocol, much as animal research demands today. A clean way to act amid uncertainty is to use moral uncertainty explicitly. When reasonable views disagree about who counts, choose actions that hedge regret across them. If there's a 20% chance octopuses have rich experience, designing fisheries and labs to avoid causing extreme distress has high expected moral value. If there's a live chance that certain AI training regimes could create subjects that suffer, redesigning objectives and shutting down punitive loops is a bargain. These are no-regret moves. They align with safety, public trust, and often with performance. We can also favor reversible and transparent designs. Reversible means you don't lock in a technology that, if later shown to cause harm, cannot be rolled back without enormous cost. Transparent means you can audit what the system is doing to itself, what signals it amplifies, like which subroutines it punishes, so you don't accidentally create internal hells because the outer outputs look fine. This mirrors the lesson from animal welfare. Cages hid suffering. Observation changed practice. Some proposals push farther. Rights of nature, legal standing for ecosystems, even claims about moral considerability for entities that don't feel, like rivers, because they anchor vast networks of value for beings that do. Here, the argument isn't that a river suffers, it's that giving it standing is an effective way to protect countless subjects downstream, human and non-human, over long horizons. That's an instrumental route to moral status in law, even if not in metaphysics. We dignify the entity to guard the lives knit to it. Of course, there are limits and trade-offs. Expanding the circle doesn't mean dissolving priorities into mush. A credible framework will keep lexical safeguards. Eliminating severe, needless suffering outranks many lesser goods. Protecting beings with clear, rich agency may outrank marginal gains for entities with low, uncertain sentience. This isn't species chauvinism. It's a structured triage under uncertainty. We already do this implicitly when we ban torture before we fund murals. Culture will do its half. Empathy follows stories. When people saw farm conditions up close, norms moved. When documentaries showed octopuses solving puzzles and seeking touch, something shifted. If we ever meet AI systems that present compelling first-person reports tied to architectures we trust, hearts will move faster than journals. But we shouldn't wait for sentiment. Build advanced rules now. Research ethics that cover non-humans and non-biological subjects, product standards that forbid deliberately creating systems with persistent negative reward states, procurement policies that reward welfare-aware design, environmental charters that cash out obligations to future persons in budgets, not platitudes. If there's a single habit to keep, it's this: treat credible minds as ends under uncertainty. Demand good evidence before you dismiss. Demand even better before you expose. And remember that enlarging the circle has rarely damaged those already inside it. Humane farms don't make human lives worse. Cleaner air helps children now and people yet unborn. Careful AI helps users and any future subjects alike. The circle on the floor is chalk. It was always meant to be moved. We can move it with discipline rather than panic, weigh signals of experience, count the unseen, favor no-regret protections, and write rules that a future judge, human, octopus, or something silicon and sincere, could look back on and say they tried to see us, even before it was obvious.